Set in 1950s England, the film opens with a woman injecting insulin into an elderly man. From there, the story shifts to a private detective named Charles Hayward, who is reading the news about the death of Aristide Leonidas, a wealthy old man believed to have died of a heart attack. Aristide is an extremely rich businessman who owns a number of hotels and restaurants. His first wife died young, and later in life he chose to marry again, this time to a much younger widow named Brenda. Not long after, Charles is visited at his office by Sophia, Aristide's eldest granddaughter. It turns out the two of them once had a brief romance when they met in Cairo, Egypt. Sophia has come to ask for Charles's help in looking into her grandfather's death, because she is convinced that Aristide was murdered, and that the killer may be someone from within the family. At first, Charles refuses because of the complicated history between them, but his assistant encourages him to take the case, pointing out that the Leonidas family is famous, and solving it could do a lot for his reputation. Before getting involved, Charles first speaks with Chief Inspector Taverner. Taverner shares the autopsy results and explains that the doctor found contraction in Aristide's pupils. The actual cause of death was esserine, a substance that had been injected into his body. Normally, esserine is used as eye drops, but if it enters the bloodstream directly, it can trigger a heart attack. Because of that, Taverner believes someone may have switched Aristide's regular insulin with esserine. He also warns Charles that Aristide was a highly controversial man. He had powerful allies, but he also had powerful enemies. That means Charles will have to be very careful with this investigation, because one wrong move could turn the entire case into a media spectacle. The next morning, Charles heads to the enormous Leonidas family estate, and this is where the mystery truly begins. This is Crooked House. When he arrives, Charles meets Edith, the sister of Aristide's first wife. She spends her time hunting wild moles on the property with a rifle because she sees them as pests. He also notices the youngest granddaughter, Josephine, a strange and observant girl who likes to sit in her treehouse and carry a notebook everywhere she goes. Soon after, Sophia arrives and takes Charles around the house. As they walk, she explains that Edith and the late Aristide often argued. Sophia also reveals that she was the one who first found Aristide dead in his bed while bringing him breakfast, just as she usually did. She explains that Aristide and his second wife, Brenda, slept in separate bedrooms, with a bathroom connecting the two rooms. Aristide's medication was kept in a small cabinet above the sink. Not long after that, Josephine introduces herself and proudly claims that she is the smartest person in the house, mostly because she reads so many books, especially detective stories. She already knows Charles is there to question everyone and look for clues. But in her opinion, the killer in a murder case is usually the person no one expects. Charles then meets Magda, Aristide's daughter-in-law, a stage actress who drinks heavily and does not offer much useful information. After that, he speaks with Magda's husband, Philip, who is often seen smoking cigars. Philip knew Charles's father, who once worked as an assistant commissioner. Sadly, Charles's father was murdered, and the killer was never identified. Philip is a historian who writes about literature in the Middle Ages. He has also written a few stage plays for his wife, Magda. Unlike the others, Philip never took over any of his father's businesses. The only one involved in the family business is his younger brother, Roger, who manages the catering company. Before leaving the room, Charles cannot help but feel suspicious of Philip. The man does not show even the slightest sign of grief, even though his father has just died. From there, Charles moves into another part of the house, a stark white room that feels very different from the rest of the mansion. Inside, he meets Clemency, a chemist who has spent years studying plant toxicology, the science of poisons derived from plants. Her husband, Roger, is also there. He comes across as strict, hot-tempered, and immediately insists that Brenda must be the one who killed Aristide. Roger confirms that he is the one managing his father's catering company, something Aristide personally trusted him to handle. But the moment Charles begins asking questions, Roger becomes defensive and angry, clearly offended by the suspicion. Not long after that, Charles meets the family's nanny, Jenny. She explains that despite the massive size of the house, the only staff members working there are herself and a single cook. Next, Charles finally meets Brenda in her room. She tells him how she first met Aristide. Years earlier, she had been working as a dancer at a casino in Las Vegas, which happened to be owned by Aristide and his partners. One day, Aristide noticed her crying. She had grown tired of the kind of men she kept meeting and dreamed of living with someone kind and decent instead. At the time, she was also feeling sick and believed she might be pregnant after sleeping with one of those men. But it turned out she was not pregnant at all. From that moment on, her relationship with Aristide slowly grew closer until the two eventually married. Brenda admits that Aristide never really liked his own children and their spouses because They all depended on his wealth instead of working hard themselves. She knows the entire family despises her, but she does not seem to care because she despises them just as much. Charles then asks if Aristide normally injected his own insulin. Brenda confirms that he usually did. However, on the night Aristide died, she was the one who gave him the injection. Aristide had asked her to do it because he said he was too tired. Brenda begins to cry, believing that she must be responsible for his death. She is certain the police will find her fingerprints on the insulin bottle and the syringe. Still, she insists she had no idea that the insulin had been contaminated with eserine. The story briefly flashes back to 18 months earlier, when Charles was still working as a diplomat in Cairo, Egypt. At that time, he met with his superior, a man named Glover, who showed him photographs of Sophia and Aristide. Glover explained that Aristide had connections with the CIA during the Greek Civil War. Because of that, Charles was asked to quietly gather information about Aristide through Sophia, since Glover knew Charles had become close to her. Back in the present, Charles searches Aristide's study for possible clues. Not long after, he is joined by Lawrence Brown, the private tutor for Josephine and Eustace. The moment Charles greets him, Lawrence quickly shuts the safe and begins chatting casually. Lawrence explains a little about Eustace, who is now a rebellious teenager. He dislikes being told what to do, hates studying, and spends most of his time listening to rock music. Lawrence also reveals that Roger's catering business is currently struggling financially. At the same time, Magda desperately needs money for her latest stage production, which unfortunately has not been attracting many audiences. Philip is not doing much better either, since the books he writes are not selling well. Eventually, Charles asks about the memoir Aristide had been writing. Lawrence confirms that he was helping Aristide work on it, but the project was extremely confidential. Now the manuscript has disappeared from the safe. From what Lawrence knows, only 3 people had entered the room while the memoir was being written. Those people were Roger, Magda, and Sophia. While relaxing by the garden, Charles is approached by Josephine, who eagerly asks whether he has already discovered any important clues. Charles explains that at the beginning of an investigation, the goal is not really to collect clues yet, but to understand the people involved. Josephine then admits that she is not particularly sad about her grandfather's death. According to her, Aristide had recently canceled her ballet classes because he believed she was not good at dancing. The problem is that Josephine loved ballet, and that decision made her resent him. She also casually reveals something much more interesting. According to Josephine, her tutor Lawrence has been secretly having an affair with Brenda, and the two of them have been exchanging letters behind everyone's back. Charles does not believe the story at all and assumes Josephine is simply making things up, but the girl insists she knows many secrets about what happens inside the house. She even claims she knows the exact places where Brenda and Lawrence usually meet. Later, Charles returns to his own home. Meanwhile, the Leonides family continues their separate routines inside the mansion. The family members rarely speak to each other, and everyone seems absorbed in their own lives. One of the people Charles has not yet met, Eustace, is seen spending time in his room practicing guitar. After arriving back in the city, Charles calls one of his contacts in the CIA to ask for more information about Aristide Leonides. When he is about to enter his apartment, he discovers that Sophia is already waiting for him. She invites him out for a drink, and the two spend the evening together at a bar, even sharing a dance. The following day, Aristide's lawyer visits Charles. The lawyer explains that he helped prepare a will for Aristide, a document that was supposed to divide the inheritance fairly among the family members. However, the will was never officially signed. That means everything Aristide owned would legally pass to his second wife, Brenda. With that information in mind, Charles visits Roger at the catering company to question him further. Roger eventually admits that the business is struggling financially. On the night before Aristide died, Roger had a heated argument with his father. During that argument, Aristide ended up writing Roger a check for £2 million to help save the company, but Roger's wife Clemency later insisted that he destroy the check. She believed Roger would never grow as a person if he continued relying on his father's money. After that, Charles meets with his CIA contact, who has gathered more background information about Aristide. It turns out Aristide once assisted the CIA during the Greek Civil War by financially supporting anti-communist groups. In return, the CIA helped conceal some of Aristide's side businesses in the United States. One of those businesses was a casino in Las Vegas, hidden from public scrutiny. Armed with that information, Charles reports back to Inspector Taverner. Taverner points out that almost every member of the Leonides family had the opportunity to kill Aristide. Their motives could range from jealousy to greed to simple anger. Taverner also urges Charles to solve the case quickly because the situation might be tied to international politics, communist movements, or even organized crime connected to Las Vegas. Charles then returns to the Leonides estate, where he finds Sophia riding a horse outside the house. As they talk, Sophia remembers something strange her grandfather once said during his 86th birthday celebration. At the time, Aristide joked with the entire family about the easiest way someone could kill him. All it would take, he said, was replacing his insulin with eye drops. He mentioned it as a random joke, but somehow he ended up dying in exactly that way. Sophia also suspects that Aristide may have intentionally hired Lawrence as the family tutor so that Brenda could secretly have an affair. Aristide understood that he was already old and believed he could no longer satisfy his young wife. Up in her treehouse, Josephine spends her time watching the house through a pair of binoculars. She enjoys spying on the rest of the family and carefully observing everything they do. Around the same time, Charles finally meets Eustace in his bedroom. Eustace has had a limp since childhood and walks with the help of a cane. He openly admits that he despises Aristide, describing him as a cruel and arrogant capitalist who enjoyed controlling other people's lives. Not long after that, Charles notices Sophia outside the house burning something. When he gets closer, he realizes she is destroying Aristide's memoir. Sophia explains that she is doing it to protect her grandfather's reputation. According to her, the memoir reveals that Aristide was involved in bomb production during World War II. After many cities were destroyed by those bombs, Aristide later secured massive government contracts to rebuild them, which made him even wealthier. Sophia insists that the memoir has nothing to do with Aristide's murder. Still, she believes the darker parts of his past should never become public knowledge, which is why she decides to burn the entire manuscript. Since Charles's car suddenly breaks down and he has no way of returning to the city, Sophia invites him to stay the night. A mechanic will be able to fix the car the next morning. That evening, something unusual happens. The entire Leonides family gathers for dinner, including Lawrence and Charles. It is a rare moment where everyone is actually sitting together at the same table. Josephine tries to join them, but Philip and Magda insist that she is too young and send Jenny to take her back to her room. Edith then openly criticizes Magda for being an irresponsible mother. After Josephine was born, Magda apparently chose to travel far away for theater performances instead of raising her children. In the end, Edith was the one who took care of them. The dinner quickly turns tense as the family begins accusing Brenda. They criticize her for skipping Aristide's funeral, claiming she avoided it because she could not face the situation. Everyone already knows that the entire inheritance would legally go to Brenda. They also bring up her past as a casino dancer, suggesting she does not belong in their family. Brenda firmly insists that she truly loved Aristide and had nothing to do with his death. In fact, she argues that the rest of the family might be the real suspects, since they all stood to gain from Aristide's fortune. The argument spreads across the table. Philip accuses Roger and Clemency of planning to leave the house simply to escape the financial collapse of their catering business. He points out that they refused to cash the £2 million check because they did not want to appear suspicious. Philip also mocks Clemency for not having children. Roger fires back by reminding everyone that Philip returned to the house only after losing his entire fortune through gambling. Roger even claims their father trusted him far more than Philip, which is why he was given control of the family company. Meanwhile, Eustace begins to suspect Sophia herself. In his mind, she might even be working together with Charles. Later that night, after everyone has gone to their rooms, Charles quietly makes his way to Josephine's treehouse. Inside, he finds the binoculars she uses to spy on the family. When he follows their line of sight, he realizes they are pointed directly toward Brenda's room. Through them, he sees Brenda secretly kissing Lawrence. The next morning, Aristide's murder becomes the main headline in the Times newspaper. Edith dismisses it, claiming the newspaper is simply chasing sensational stories. Not long after that, Jenny informs Charles that a mechanic has arrived to repair his car. However, it turns out the starter cable is missing. No one knows who removed it. Soon after, a shocking accident occurs. Josephine falls from her treehouse and loses consciousness. Philip immediately rushes her to the hospital. Inspector Taverner also arrives at the scene, eager to bring the case to a quick conclusion. When they examine the treehouse, they discover something alarming. The ladder has been deliberately cut. In other words, someone intentionally caused Josephine's fall. Charles quickly suspects that the same person who killed Aristide may have done this. After all, Josephine is known for spying on everyone in the house. If the killer realized that, silencing her would make perfect sense. Meanwhile, Edith is seen quietly reading Josephine's notebook. When Charles suddenly appears, she quickly hides it behind a chair. Not long after that, Aristide's lawyer gathers the entire family to deliver unexpected news. It turns out there is a newer will that Aristide prepared with another lawyer, and this one was properly signed. In this document, Brenda receives only a small portion of Aristide's wealth. The overwhelming majority of the inheritance, more than 90%, is left to his eldest granddaughter, Sophia. The revelation leaves the rest of the family stunned. Philip, in particular, reacts with visible anger.
No!
Later, while speaking privately with Charles, Sophia admits that she already knew about the inheritance. Her grandfather had told her personally. Aristide believed that wealth would disappear if it ended up in the wrong hands. That belief was also the reason Sophia had to leave Charles behind in Cairo. Aristide had called her back to England so he could personally teach her how to manage the family fortune. As the investigation continues, Charles and Taverner discover a hidden door inside the house. Behind it is a narrow staircase that leads up to a tower rooftop. There they find a box filled with letters written by Brenda and addressed to Lawrence. The letters clearly express her love for him. Some even suggest that she wished Aristide would die so the two of them could finally be together. With that discovery, Brenda and Lawrence immediately become the prime suspects. The motive appears obvious: inheritance, conspiracy, and a secret affair. However, as the police take her away, Brenda repeatedly insists that she never wrote those letters and that someone must have framed her. Later, Edith asks Charles to help find the best and most expensive lawyer possible to defend Brenda. Edith strongly believes that Brenda is innocent. Charles also feels uneasy about the evidence. The letters alone do not feel like solid proof, since handwriting and documents can always be forged. Taverner, however, believes the case is strong enough. From his perspective, the rest will simply be decided in court. Before long, the news spreads everywhere. The newspapers report that Brenda and Lawrence are responsible for Aristide's murder. Even Charles's name appears in the articles as the man who solved the case. The next day, Josephine returns home from the hospital. Fortunately, her leg is not broken, and she appears perfectly healthy. But the moment she enters her room, she becomes furious. Her notebook has disappeared, and she immediately accuses Jenny of taking it. At the same time, Edith visits a cancer specialist. It is quietly revealed that she has been suffering from terminal cancer and only has a few months left to live. The next morning, another tragedy strikes. Jenny is suddenly found dead after drinking a cup of hot chocolate. A forensic doctor begins examining the drink to determine what substance might have been inside it. Knowing that Jenny was Josephine's caretaker and that Josephine spends much of her time secretly observing the family, Charles decides to speak with the girl privately. He pushes her to reveal anything she might know about the murders. Josephine calmly admits that she already knows who killed Aristide. She even claims that the same person was responsible for cutting the ladder of the treehouse, but she refuses to tell Charles the name. To her, the entire situation feels like a real-life detective story, just like the ones she loves to read. She enjoys watching the mystery unfold. Before Charles can get more out of her, Edith arrives and informs him that Inspector Taverner may have discovered a new development in the case. Shortly afterward, Edith takes Josephine out of the house, saying they are going to town for ice cream. Meanwhile, Taverner and another detective begin to suspect that the hot chocolate Jenny drank contains cyanide. When Charles hears this, he suddenly remembers something important. Edith often hunts moles around the property, and cyanide can be used to kill those animals. Immediately, Charles rushes to Edith's storage shed on the grounds. A disturbing possibility crosses his mind. If Edith discovered the truth, Josephine might become her next target. Inside the shed, Charles finds a bottle of cyanide. But that is not all. Hidden inside a barrel filled with lime, he also finds Josephine's missing notebook. At the same time, Edith manages to leave the estate with Josephine. She calmly convinces the police guarding the gate, as well as the reporters gathered outside, that Taverner allowed her to take the girl out for a few hours so she would not have to remain at the scene of the investigation. As soon as Charles realizes what is happening, he and Sophia begin chasing Edith's car. Inside Charles's vehicle, they discover a letter. From the handwriting alone, Sophia immediately recognizes that it was written by Edith. While they race after the car, Sophia reads the letter. It contains a confession claiming that Edith herself killed Aristide and Jenny, but Charles does not believe it. Instead, he asks Sophia to read Josephine's notebook. Inside the notebook, the truth finally becomes clear. The pages reveal the thoughts of a 12-year-old girl who felt trapped inside a toxic family. Josephine writes about how bored and resentful she was, especially toward Aristide. Her anger began when Aristide canceled her ballet lessons, telling her she was a terrible dancer. Ballet was something she truly loved, and the humiliation made her hate her grandfather. The notebook then lays out the entire plan. Josephine secretly entered the bathroom connected to Aristide's room. There, she disposed of the insulin and replaced it with Esserine. To mislead everyone afterward, she cut the ladder of the treehouse and deliberately caused herself to fall, making it look like someone had attacked her.
Schoolroom. Now I must climb up to the treehouse with it.
However, Jenny started to grow suspicious. She noticed mud on Josephine's shoes, mud that only existed near the shed where tools like the cutting equipment were kept. Realizing Jenny might expose her, Josephine poisoned her with cyanide taken from Edith's supplies. Part of the motive was simply to silence a witness, but Josephine also deeply resented Jenny, who constantly scolded her and followed her everywhere. In Josephine's mind, Jenny was nothing more than an annoying and foolish adult. Josephine even went one step further. She forged letters by copying Brenda's handwriting, creating fake messages that made it look like Brenda wanted Aristide dead. At this point, the truth is undeniable. Josephine was responsible for everything. The mind of a lonely child, neglected by her parents and surrounded by a deeply dysfunctional family, had slowly twisted over time. For Josephine, creating a complicated murder that would confuse detectives felt just like living inside the detective novels she loved so much. After reading the notebook, Charles finally understands what must have happened. Edith must have sensed that something about Josephine did not feel right. At some point, she likely found the girl's notebook and discovered the horrifying truth hidden inside its pages. That explains why Edith had been so determined to help Brenda and Lawrence. She knew they were innocent and had been falsely accused, but at the same time, she also could not bear the thought of Josephine being arrested or sent to a mental institution. So Edith made a decision. She wrote a letter confessing to the murders herself. Even so, Charles and Sophia are still unsure where Edith has taken Josephine. Not long after, they finally spot Edith's car on the road. But instead of heading toward town, the car is driving toward an old mining area. Charles immediately begins chasing after them. Inside the car, Josephine slowly realizes something is wrong. This is not the road to the city, and panic begins to take over. Moments later, Edith drives the car straight toward the edge of the mining site. The vehicle plunges into the ravine below and explodes. In the end, Edith had chosen to do the unthinkable. She believed it was the only way to protect Josephine. Sooner or later, the truth would come out, and the police or Charles would discover that Josephine was responsible for everything. And Edith herself did not have much time left to live anyway. So the moral of the story is, if a kid reads too many detective books and starts spying on everyone, maybe hide the poison before she turns the house into her own murder mystery.